Story Time with Stephanie Storey.
Welcome to Story Time. I am your host, art historical novelist Stephanie Storey, and I am fascinated to talk to my guest today for many reasons. She was born and raised in India, which we will talk some about. She honed her craft as a journalist, and now she's a novelist. Her debut novel, My Mother's Kitchen, was an award-winning book that combined fiction with recipes. And her newest novel, just out earlier this spring, is called Seeing Ceremony. It also combines fiction with recipes, which I think is a fabulous idea. Welcome to the show, Meera Klein.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, so tell our viewers, our listeners about this concept. Where did it come from? Why did you do it? Of combining storytelling with recipes. Brilliant. We should all be doing it.
And we kind of do. People just don't realize it. You know, if you look at people's blogs, they're always telling stories before they print the recipe. Well, it started with a phone call in 2003 from my sister who lives in India saying our mother had passed away. And of course, I was devastated because I couldn't be with her. I hadn't seen her for about a year. And I knew as a writer, I've always wanted to be a writer, I needed to write something as a tribute to her. But I had young kids, you know, kindergarten kids, second grade. So I put it in the back burner. And in 2008, a local writer was having a workshop, and he was inviting people to come, bring your work, and we'll talk about it and critique it. And my husband forced me to go to this. And that's when I first wrote this first chapter, which is the first chapter in My Mother's Kitchen. And then I got this idea at the end. I said, why not add a recipe? And this would be a tribute to my mom because she and I had such a good relationship in the kitchen. And eventually she conceded I became a better cook than her. But, you know, mom's cooking is always the best. So it came naturally. And so after that book didn't have really a plot. It was mostly vignettes of this little girl growing up in her mother's kitchen. Book clubs love it because they can read the book and then they'll prepare whatever the meals are. I didn't do it in an organized fashion. So it was just writing the chapter, and at the end, whatever recipe came up. So the first chapter, it was about this girl who's escaping her father wasn't abusive, but he was trying to marry her off. And so she comes as a refuge to take refuge in my mother's kitchen. And at the end of the chapter, the girl says, oh, I'll have lemon rice for my wedding, you know, if I ever get married. And so that's what I added, my mother's lemon rice.
You came to the United States when you were in college, yes?
I came twice.
Here for college?
I came twice. When I was 9 years old, my grandmother, my sister who was 6, and my grandmother who was 78, and myself, we came to visit my uncle. And that's because my grandmother, she's actually a great aunt, we call her grandmother. She was my uncle's mother, and she wanted to visit her son. And so we came over, and I was the only one who spoke English in our 3 group. And so I basically brought them over at 9. And we stayed here from 9 till I was 9, 10, 11. I was going on 12. And then my mother she came and joined us a year later, and she decided America was not the place to bring up daughters. She didn't want me to get into dating. She didn't want, you know, she wanted me to have more of a traditional life. And so she took us back when I was 12 going on 13.
Okay.
And then I went to a Catholic convent because in India, the public schools are really private schools. We call them, like in English, we call them public schools. So I went to a Catholic convent for the rest of my high school education. And then for my college, I started college before my marriage was being arranged. I went to a Hindu college, which was all women's college. And so at 18, and then 16, my father passed away. So at 18, everybody in our family decided, oh, you know, this poor mother with 2 daughters, we need to figure out a way to take care of them. And they thought the way to do that would be to arrange my marriage. And so that's why I went through a seeing ceremony, just like in the book the girl goes through. So it's, you know, it's a little bit based on my own personal experiences.
tell me a little bit about your seeing ceremony and the seeing ceremony of Meena. How were they the same? How are they different?
They're actually very, very similar.
Okay.
When I turned 18, so this is what, in a this is what happened to me, and not all seeing ceremonies go this way. I mean, I don't want any Indian people writing you nasty notes or comments on your, but this is my personal experience. When I was 18, and so what they're looking for, and we come from a fairly high placed family in Kerala, which is the very deep south of India. And so we are trying to find somebody who is at similar standing. So they find someone of the same social standing, same caste. And they found this guy and they said, now we have to match your horoscopes. And so all Indian children, when I was growing up, and maybe not now as much, would have their horoscopes written the day they were born or the week after they were born. And sometimes it's, my uncle who passed away a few years ago, would have been he would have been 100 now. His horoscope was written on papyrus sleeves, so it's scratched in there. But ours was written in a notebook, just a regular college little notebook. But anyway, so what we're trying to do is see how many of there are like 10 or so points that you have to match. And unfortunately for me, this guy and we clicked with like 8 points. And so the next step would be to see each other to see if we liked what we saw. And so we had this arrangement to go to another aunt's house, and I had made some snacks, which is in the book. It's called Seeing Ceremony cakes. They're little deep fried lentil cakes, which are really super yummy. And waiting for the guy to come, and waiting, and he didn't show up, but some relatives of his came up, and they came in and they sat down, they talked to me, and I was wearing a sari then, like I am dressed now. And they said, there were questions they asked me, do you always like to wear a sari? And I said, actually, no, I actually prefer skirts and jeans. Okay. What about, and then they were watching me walk, and they said, how tall are you? I'm not super tall, I'm 5'5". But I was wearing heels, so I was like 5, and they were, okay, we make sure you're not taller than the groom. So, all these questions. And then, do you want to go to school? What do you want to do? So they finished all asking, and then they said, okay, now tell us, do you want to marry him? I'm like, what? I haven't seen him. How can I say I want to marry him? And they go, oh, okay, sorry. And they take out this little snapshot of like 3 men in a boat. And they're all like squinting into the sun. And they point to the middle guy who can't even see his face. That's the guy. That's the guy. What do you think? And I later told my mother, after she expressed her disappointment in me, that if I was going to marry someone who had no idea what his character was, whether we were going to get along, I wanted a really handsome guy. Yes, it's very shallow, but I wanted a movie star handsome guy. And so I said, no, I need to see him in person. You can't see anything in this picture. And I don't know what made me say that. I kept insisting I need to see him in person. And and finally those people left in a huff saying, this is not the kind of girl we want, who can't make up her mind. And then my relatives all sat me down and said, you really need, he's a good boy, he comes from a great family, same kind of family like ours, you really need to say yes. And so I wrote, in despair, I wrote to my uncle, since I'd visited him when I was young, we'd been corresponding all my life. And his wife, my aunt, we were really close. So I sent them a letter saying, I'm having such a hard time, I don't know what to do. And so he wrote back with a plane ticket and an invitation to come study here. And so that's how I ended up in 82, coming to Sonoma State, and then I went to Berkeley and got a master's in journalism.
That is an extraordinary act of gorgeous rebellion from a young woman. I mean,
and I have never rebelled again.
You never rebelled again. Not before, not after, but that moment.
That moment I did, and then I did have one more rebellion, and that was a big, big, big one. When I was leaving on the plane, I had my cousins all come to say goodbye, and their one caveat was, when you come back, please don't bring a white boy back. And I was very good. I went 4 years to school. The last year, there was this blonde, blue-eyed guy who sat next to me in the political science class. And he ended up coming to America with me, to India, and we got married in India.
Oh, that is an amazing.
Married now 34 years.
34 years. That is honestly, you are my hero. Take me back, because you were talking about touchingly about your mom and your relationship with her, and that's what started all of this. Take me back to, you were a little girl and she's teaching you to cook, right? Was that an important part of your relationship growing up? How did you and how did you bring that relationship and that cooking into your adult life?
Well, when I was growing up in India, if you ever read the book, you'll see the description of the kitchen is very similar to the kitchen that I grew up in. And starting maybe when I was 5 or 6 years old, I was ready to make, you've heard of rotis, chapatis, which is Indian flatbread, rolling them out.
Mm-hmm.
So I was happy to do that with my mom. And when I couldn't do, small tasks like peeling cardamom pods and crushing it, I enjoyed being with her. Just naturally learned how to cook. And so at that time in my household, there was my mother, a grandmother, and a housekeeper. And so all of these women were cooking, and I would watch them and learn from them. And then eventually, this is a very little known fact I'm sharing with you, is that I don't know if you've heard of the cookbook called Laurel's Kitchen. It's a vegetarian cookbook in the 70s. It changed the way people thought about eating meat. Laurel Robertson, who wrote, is a really good friend of mine. So when I came back to this country in the 1980s, to go to college here, I lived with Laurel, and I had access to the way she cooked, and she was this amazing cook. So I got another, from my mother, I got all the Indian, how to make powders and, the spice powders, how to make chapatis, rotis, all our dumplings and rice dishes. And then I came to America and I got this learning experience from this amazing cook who had written this cookbook. So I was just really fortunate I had such strong women teachers who I was able to emulate and learn from.
When I read your books, am I going to be really hungry? Like, do I need to be worried and have a stack of food next to me? Just listening to you talk about food, I'm like, oh, I got to go eat something. Like, do you put all of this love?
Hungry. Because especially the first book, it was a lot of food writing. And I went to, just in this area, I went to about 30 book clubs that first year. They invited me to come to their house, and I ate many versions of my food, some really good, some not so good.
Did you have any idea people would do that? Did you, when you were writing it and you were thinking, okay, I'm going to publish this, did you think of people like, people are going to be reading my book and getting together and making these meals? Was that like a vision of yours?
No, and I say, I have a disclaimer in my book, I'm not a chef. I cook by instinct. I put some in and say, that doesn't taste good. It needs, I know, white pepper. I can't, it's very hard for me to write the recipes. And so in the first book, there were quite a few recipes that didn't quite sometimes work. And people were contacting me, where's the coconut? You see, you have to add coconut. So this one, I worked a little harder on the recipes, and I had a couple of friends helping me go through the recipes to make sure they work. No, but I had no idea. And then, people were telling me, what a great marketing idea. Now you have not only this, you also have the cooking. And I haven't actually done enough of it. I mean, it's getting to be, I just started an Instagram account where I'm posting what I eat every day and, getting people excited about food.
I look forward to trying out some of the recipes.
Yeah, they're very simple because I do complicated things, but the ones that I did them so that people can enjoy Indian food without like all the complications. And the food that you see in my books and find in my books are very different from what you find in a restaurant. That's not my kind of Indian food.
Okay.
Yeah, my sons never liked the smell of curry.
Oh, I love curry. Now I love Indian curry. But real fast, give me a little bit of a highlight of what the difference is between when I go to an Indian restaurant and I sit down for Indian food and the kinds of recipes you give us in these books.
It's the region, basically. What you're having when you go to an Indian restaurant, mostly it's Punjabi and North Indian food. Okay. And I come from the very deep south where there's lots of coconut and lots of white rice and red rice. So it's, the flavors are really sharp and fresh. For example, Mother's lemon rice. It's very tangy. Then it's got cashews sautéed in ghee, so it gives it a nice creamy flavor. And you serve it with a potato ginger stew that has coconut milk in it. So it's very mellow. So that's the kind of flavors. And sharp. We have like mango pickle, where you take a mango and you just slice it and you toss it in chili oil and chili powder and salt. And you just, I don't know if you like spicy food.
I do.
Oh, good. Then you'll like the book.
Well, and my husband studied massage in Kerala for 6 months.
Oh my gosh.
So that's the part of India that he's so familiar with. And whenever we do go to Indian restaurants, he always says, this isn't really what I ate in Kerala.
So tell him there's avial. I don't know if you'll remember that word. You can see it when you go. It's called avial, and it's a stew that's made with coconut and yogurt, and it's tangy and so yummy. And he'll know what that is if he's been to Kerala. It's in every feast.
Oh, good. Oh, this is so exciting. Okay.
You'll have to make that for him, or have him make it for you.
Okay, great. I will. It has been so fascinating during this pandemic to watch how central food has been, with people rushing to the store to go hoard food, and some people not having enough food to eat, and other people baking and sort of living their lives around what they're eating. What perspective, since you've written 2 books with food at the central of them, what has been your perspective on the role of food during this whole pandemic quarantine period?
Well, you sort of summarized the whole thing. When I first when I wrote this book, I wanted everybody to enjoy cooking. Cooking gives me a lot of joy, and then sharing it with other people gives me a lot of joy. And so I in all the chapters, and especially the first book, a lot of the sharing is about the cooking process and how good it is to be in the kitchen doing that. And now the whole world has discovered that, because they have the time. Because in the past they didn't have the time to do the sourdough or to cook. Now I'm also part of a blog called Pandemic Cooking, and it's great because it gives you ideas. People are using leftovers to do this, or how to make. You don't have onions, so what are we going to use? Oh, we're going to use. I don't know if you've heard of hing. It's a resin that smells and tastes like garlic when you saute it, and it's a spice that's essential in Indian cooking. So people are discovering all these new things, and I think that's really, really amazing and wonderful.
Yeah, that people are discovering new foods
Yeah.
at this, and getting a little bit adventurous by what they have in their house.
On the flip side, you were talking about how some people didn't have enough food, and that really bothers me, because I'm from India, and there's been news stories of what's going on there that's very disturbing. And here there are farmers dumping millions of gallons of milk, and in Idaho, potatoes being left to rot, and it just breaks my heart. So at the same time, I'm aware of it when I'm cooking, how blessed we are to be living in such bounty.
Okay, but one other thing. So you were a journalist for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and then you transitioned into novel writing. Tell me how. Well, and I'm sure you're still a journalist, but tell me how you went from journalism to now you're writing longer form.
Mm-hmm.
And how that transition, how that change has been, or is it pretty much the same?
It's not the same at all.
Okay.
I mean, journalism, if someone says it's literature, hurry up literature. It's literature in a hurry.
Yeah.
While when you're writing books, as you know, especially yours, where you have all this research and hours and hours of time that you put in, and then you have to edit it. Mine is not as in-depth and as rich as your novels, but still it requires some writing to write 60,000, 70,000 words. While the most you write is 5,000 words in a news, they don't want a ton of words. They want as short pieces as possible. What it did teach me, though, was to use words, not to, how important each word is. It's like writing short story. Whenever I get stuck writing, I find that you go write a poem or a short story, it kind of helps your creative juices like click, because it makes you think about words and emotions in a way that's different from writing a novel. So in some ways, that's what journalism prepared me for, being able to say what I mean. The other was to do a little research, ask the question why. I've always liked to do that when I was a reporter. I liked doing stories, and I scooped the LA Times a couple of times, our little newspaper. Yeah, it was so cool. I had good sources and I had good connections. And then I had in the newspaper, now it's no longer around. I had a little Saturday column where I talked about growing up in India, and it was like the most popular column. So many people looked forward to like a trip every Sunday in India with my granny. We'd go to the market, and it's this huge open air market, and I would describe the food, and I say how it relates to the farmers market in Ventura, and people love that kind of writing. So that's, I kept that kind of feeling in my books. I like the feel good. I read somewhere there's a genre called uplifting literature. They call it uplift. And I thought that's what I like my book to be called. It's something that makes you feel good after reading it, and you can read it before bed and not have nightmares.
Okay, this has seriously been an uplifting conversation. I love the idea of uplifting literature and sending people to bed with happy thoughts, particularly at this very strange time in our world and our lives. So thank you for joining me today for this conversation. Thank you for the books you're writing and the world and the whole world you're sharing with people. I look forward to reading your books and to eating your food.
Oh, good.
Story
Thank you so much,
time with
Stephanie.
Stephanie Storey. Story time virtually. We've got time and plenty of stories, talking stories in a novel way. Story time with Stephanie.